Level 1. A nuclear weapon so small that one soldier can carry it. The W-54 warhead weighs just 51 pounds, about as much as a large suitcase. Yet this micro-nuke packs the explosive force of 20 tons of TNT. To put that in perspective, Oklahoma City bombing used just 2.3 tons of explosives and took out half a federal building. Now multiply that by 10. The Americans actually deployed these things. The Davy Crockett recoilless gun could launch a W-54 warhead up to 2.5 miles away. But here's the twisted part. The lethal radiation radius from the blast was almost as far as the weapon could shoot. Fire this thing, and you might irradiate yourself along with the enemy. During the 1962 tests, they actually had Attorney General Robert Kennedy watch the mushroom cloud from a trench. The explosion was so small by nuclear standards that officials could safely observe from just a couple miles away. When your nuclear weapon is considered spectator-friendly, you know you're dealing with something uniquely terrifying. The blast itself would flatten everything within about 1,600 feet. Windows would shatter for miles, but the real killer was the radiation. Anyone within a few hundred yards would receive a lethal dose instantly, whether they survived the explosion or not. These weren't just experimental toys. The military had plans to give individual soldiers nuclear grenades. Green Berets actually trained with 70-pound backpack nukes, practicing missions where they'd parachute behind enemy lines, set a timer, and try to escape before their own weapon killed them. Imagine the mission briefing. Your job is to sneak into enemy territory with a nuclear bomb and hopefully not die when it goes off. Level 1 weapons brought nuclear warfare down to the squad level. One soldier can now carry the power to erase a small town. But that is just the beginning. Level 2. Now we're climbing into the realm where small nuclear weapons start acting like city killers. Between 0.1 and 1 kiloton, we're talking about 100 to 1,000 tons of TNT going off in a single instant. To put that in perspective, remember the Beirut explosion in 2020? That ammonium nitrate blast that devastated the entire port and shattered windows 6 miles away? That was about 1.1 kilotons, and that wasn't even nuclear. This is where North Korea made their terrifying debut. In 2006, they detonated their first nuclear test, and it was a dud. The thing barely worked, fizzling out at maybe 0.4 to 0.7 kilotons. Even as a failure, it was enough to shake mountains and make the entire world nervous. That's the power we're dealing with at level 2. The Americans took these sub-kiloton nukes and did something absolutely insane with them. They built over 300 backpack nukes called SADMs and handed them to special forces. Picture this: two-man teams parachuting behind enemy lines with a 150-pound atomic bomb stuffed in a canvas bag. They'd set a timer and try to escape. Except try is the key word here, because surviving within miles of even a half-kiloton blast is basically impossible. In 1955, they tested one of these demolition nukes in Nevada using 1.2 kilotons to blow up an entire hill. It left a crater 300 feet wide and 128 feet deep. But the most bizarre test happened in 1957 when the US military fired a 1.7 kiloton nuclear air-to-air missile over the Nevada desert. 5 Air Force officers volunteered to stand directly underneath the 10,000-foot-high explosion to prove it was safe. They somehow survived, but honestly, that says more about luck than science. At this level, a single detonation can level most of a downtown area. The blast wave extends out to about a half a mile, crushing buildings and killing anyone caught in the open. But here's the twisted part. The lethal radiation actually reaches further than the destructive blast. You could survive the explosion only to die from radiation poisoning a mile away. These aren't city killers yet, but they're definitely city wounders, and they fit in a backpack. Level 3. We've crossed into genuine city killer territory. Between 1 and 10 kilotons, we're talking about weapons that can erase entire downtown areas from existence. A 10 kiloton bomb packs 2/3 the power of the weapon that obliterated Hiroshima. Even at the low end, a 1 kiloton blast releases the energy of 1,000 tons of TNT detonating simultaneously. This is where things get truly warped. Enter the neutron bomb, the weapon that kills people but leaves buildings standing. The W-79 and W-70 enhanced radiation warheads were deliberately designed around 1 to 2 kilotons, engineered to flood an area with lethal neutron radiation while minimizing blast damage. Picture this nightmare. A 1 kiloton neutron bomb explodes over an enemy tank formation. The tanks remain intact, the buildings around them barely damaged, but every human within just a mile radius dead from radiation poisoning within hours. NATO actually planned to deploy these things across Western Europe during the Cold War. The sales pitch was horrifying in its logic. Kill invading Soviet tank crews with radiation while preserving European infrastructure. They called it a cleaner nuclear weapon, as if there's anything clean about cooking people alive with neutrons while leaving their surroundings untouched. But even conventional level 3 nukes are devastating. A 10 kiloton airburst creates a fireball nearly half a kilometer across. Everything inside gets vaporized instantly. The severe blast zone extends about half a mile, flattening virtually every structure. Moderate damage reaches out to 1.5 miles, collapsing most residential buildings. And broken windows? Those can extend 5 miles in every direction. North Korea demonstrated this power in 2009 with a test estimated between 2 and 7 kilotons. The blast caused underground tunnels to collapse and was felt across the border in China. Even as an underground test, it shook mountains. The Americans took this yield range and stuffed it into artillery shells. The W-33 howitzer round could deliver 5 to 10 kilotons from an ordinary cannon, basically lobbing Hiroshima-level destruction like it was conventional artillery. The Soviets went one step further, detonating a 10-kiloton tactical nuke during a 1953 military exercise with live troops maneuvering nearby. Many of those soldiers later developed radiation sickness. Level 3 represents the terrifying sweet spot where nuclear weapons become both tactically usable and strategically devastating. Level 4. Welcome to the weapons that ended World War II and ushered in the nuclear age. Between 10 and 25 kilotons, we're looking at true city killers, bombs that can erase an entire metropolis in a single flash. This is Hiroshima and Nagasaki territory. Little Boy, the uranium bomb dropped on Hiroshima, yielded about 15 kilotons. Fat Man, which destroyed Nagasaki, packed 21 kilotons. These weren't the largest nuclear weapons ever built, not even close, but they were devastating enough to force Japan's surrender and fundamentally change warfare forever. Picture Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945. The bomb detonated 2,000 feet above the city. In that instant, a fireball 1,500 feet across formed, roughly the size of 5 city blocks. Everything inside was vaporized. The heat was so intense that it burned shadows of people onto walls where their bodies had shielded the stone. One famous shadow remains on the steps of a bank. A person sitting down, their outline permanently etched into the concrete while everything around them was scorched to black. Within a 1-mile radius, nearly everything was obliterated. Buildings weren't just damaged, they were erased down to their foundations. The thermal radiation was so powerful that it caused third-degree burns a mile away. People's clothes spontaneously ignited from the heat flash. About 70,000 to 80,000 people died instantly, but that was just the beginning. Over the following months, the death toll climbed to 140,000 as radiation sickness took hold. Victims experienced hair loss, bleeding from every orifice, and organ failure. Many had been far enough from ground zero to survive the blast, only to die slowly from acute radiation syndrome. The bomb also created black rain, radioactive soot and water that fell for hours, contaminating anyone it touched. The electromagnetic pulse fried Hiroshima's electrical systems, cutting off communication with the outside world. Remember the Beirut explosion that we compared to level 2? That was about 1 kiloton. Hiroshima was 15 times more powerful. In today's densely populated cities, one single level 4 weapon could easily kill hundreds of thousands of people. These are the bombs that taught the world to fear nuclear war, and by modern standards, they're considered small. Level 5. Now we're talking about the workhorses of nuclear arsenals, weapons that make Hiroshima look like a firecracker. Between 25 and 150 kilotons, these are the bombs currently sitting in silos and submarines around the world, ready to erase entire cities. The W-76 warhead, which arms US Trident submarines, packs 100 kilotons into a package small enough to fit on a missile. The United States has hundreds of these things. Each one carries 6 times the destructive power of the bomb that leveled Hiroshima. Here's where nuclear physics gets truly terrifying. A 100 kiloton airburst creates a fireball nearly a mile across. Everything inside that sphere, buildings, cars, people, simply ceases to exist, vaporized in temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The severe destruction zone extends out nearly a mile, obliterating even reinforced concrete structures. Light damage reaches beyond 10 miles in every direction. But the real nightmare is the thermal pulse. About 35% of the bomb's energy gets converted to heat, creating a flash so intense it can cause third-degree burns up to 8 miles away. In a dense urban area, this triggers a firestorm, multiple fires merging into a hurricane of flame that consumes oxygen and generates winds powerful enough to uproot trees. The math is brutal. Thanks to the cube root scaling law, an 8-fold increase in yield doubles the destruction radius. So while Little Boy's 15 kiloton bomb devastated about a mile, a 120 kiloton weapon would flatten roughly 20 square miles, an area the size of Manhattan. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviets had placed tactical nukes in Cuba that were only 12 kilotons each. Meanwhile, the US had Jupiter missiles in Turkey carrying 1.4 megaton warheads, nearly 10 times more powerful than anything in level 5. The fact that none of these launched is probably why you're alive to hear this. A single 100 kiloton ground burst could contaminate thousands of square miles with lethal fallout. When the Soviets tested a 150 kiloton device in 1953, soldiers observing from what they thought was a safe distance got zapped with radiation, and the fallout spread across a massive area of Kazakhstan. These are the city killers that populate modern arsenals. Each one is a portable apocalypse, and yet we're only halfway up the scale. Level 6. We've crossed into the realm of region killers. Between 150 and 500 kilotons, these weapons don't just destroy cities, they erase entire metropolitan areas. This is where thermonuclear engineering reaches its terrifying efficiency, packing the power to level Manhattan into a warhead the size of a trash can. The W-88 warhead, mounted on US Trident submarines, delivers 475 kilotons. That's over 30 times the power of Hiroshima, small enough that 8 of them can fit on a single missile. One submarine carrying these weapons has more destructive power than every bomb dropped in World War II combined. The physics at this level become almost incomprehensible. A 500 kiloton airburst creates a fireball up to 1.2 miles across, a ball of plasma hot enough to engulf entire downtown districts. The thermoflash can cause third-degree burns 20 miles away. The blast wave flattens houses out to 3 or 4 miles from ground zero. Using the cube root scaling law, a 500 kiloton bomb has nearly 3 times the destruction radius of Hiroshima. Where Little Boy devastated about a mile radius, this creates a circle of annihilation over 5 miles across. The entire urban core of Washington, D.C. could be wiped out with a single warhead. But the most sinister aspect is the thermal pulse potential. The thermal pulse ignites thousands of simultaneous fires across hundreds of square miles. These merge into a self-sustaining inferno that generates hurricane-force winds, consuming oxygen and everything flammable for miles around. In the 1950s, the US seriously considered using 300 of these 350 kiloton bombs to excavate a new Panama Canal. They called it Project Gamtra and estimated it would only take about 300 nuclear explosions to carve a sea-level canal through Central America. The environmental consequences were apparently an afterthought. During the Cold War, both superpowers deployed thousands of these weapons. No level 6 device has ever been used in combat, only in test, but a single Trident submarine today carries enough firepower to eliminate dozens of major cities. We've moved beyond city busting into region busting territory. This is where nuclear weapons stop being tactical tools and become instruments of civilization-ending destruction.
Level 7. We've entered the realm of the hydrogen bomb, weapons that don't just destroy cities, they obliterate them so completely that the very concept of rebuilding becomes meaningless. Between 0.5 and 2 megatons, these are the weapons that defined Cold War nightmares. 1 megaton equals the explosive power of 1,000,000 tons of TNT. To put that in perspective, it's like detonating every bomb dropped in World War II all at once. The B-83 gravity bomb represents the peak of American nuclear engineering, 1.2 megatons of thermonuclear fury that remains the most powerful weapon in the US arsenal today. When this thing detonates, the fireball expands up to 2 miles across. That's not just big enough to vaporize downtown, it's big enough to erase the entire urban core of most major cities. The thermal flash from a 1 megaton burst is brighter than the sun at 50 miles distance. Third-degree burns extend out to 12 miles. The blast wave flattens everything within a 5-mile radius, generating winds over 500 miles per hour, literally faster than the speed of sound. That's a supersonic shockwave moving down everything in its path. But the most terrifying aspect is the firestorm potential. The thermal pulse ignites fires across tens of square kilometers simultaneously. These merge into a single massive conflagration that consumes oxygen and creates its own weather system, a hurricane of fire that suffocates anyone who somehow survived the initial blast in shelters. The Soviets tested a 1.2 megaton device in 1962 that broke windows 600 miles away in Finland. The atmosphere pressure wave traveled across an entire continent. During the Cold War peak, both superpowers had thousands of weapons in this range deployed and ready. The B-53 bomb, slightly above this level at 9 megatons, was considered a bunker buster, because apparently the solution to hardened underground targets was to use a weapon that could level entire mountain ranges. Andrei Sakharov, the man who designed the Tsar Bomba, later wrote about imagining a 3 megaton bomb dropped on New York City. The vision of total annihilation was so horrifying that it turned him into a peace advocate. This is where nuclear weapons stop being military tools and become instruments of civilization-ending genocide. Level 8. Welcome to the realm of planet shakers. Between 2 and 25 megatons, these aren't just weapons of mass destruction, they're geological events that happen to be man-made. The largest weapon ever deployed by the United States was the Mk-41 hydrogen bomb, weighing nearly 5 tons and packing 25 megatons. They never tested it at full yield, but they built them anyway. Each one carried enough power to obliterate an entire metropolitan region. Castle Bravo in 1954 demonstrated what happens when these monsters get unleashed. Designed for 6 megatons, it overperformed and delivered 15 megatons instead. The fireball expanded to over 2.5 miles across, literally the size of a major city. The mushroom cloud towered 13,000 feet into the stratosphere, and the fallout, it contaminated a Japanese fishing boat 100 miles away, giving the crew acute radiation sickness. At this level, the cube root scaling law becomes almost academic. A 20 megaton bomb creates a circle of total destruction 25 miles in diameter. diameter. That's enough to erase all of Greater London or cover most of Los Angeles County in fire and ruin. The thermal flash from a 1 megaton burst is brighter than the sun at 50 miles distance. Third-degree burns extend out to 12 miles. Blast wave flattens everything within a 5-mile radius, generating winds over 500 miles per hour, literally faster than the speed of sound. That's a supersonic shockwave moving down everything in its path. But the most terrifying aspect is the firestorm potential. The thermal pulse ignites fires across tens of square kilometers simultaneously. These merge into a single massive conflagration that consumes oxygen and creates its own weather system, a hurricane of fire that suffocates anyone who somehow survived the initial blast in shelters. Ivy Mike in 1952 literally erased an entire Pacific island from existence. The island of Alugilab was there one moment, completely vaporized the next, leaving only an underwater crater 1 mile wide. These weapons force scientists to ask existential questions. Could a 20 megaton bomb ignite the Earth's atmosphere? The answer they got after testing one of these regardless was no, but the fact that physicists were even calculating this possibility shows how close we came to building weapons that could threaten the planet itself. Level 9. This level belongs to one weapon alone, Tsar Bomba, the king of all bombs. On October 30th, 1961, the Soviet Union detonated the most powerful human-made explosion in history. 50 megatons of pure thermonuclear fury. But here's the thing that should terrify you. They deliberately scaled it down from its original 100 megaton design. The bomb was so massive, 26 tons and 8 meters long, that it barely fit in the modified T-95 bomber. They had to remove the bomb bay doors and paint the plane white to reflect the thermal radiation. The crew was given a 50% chance of survival, even flying 30 miles away from the blast. When it detonated at 13,000 feet, it created a fireball 5 miles wide that nearly reached the altitude of the release plane. The mushroom cloud climbed 220,000 feet into the mesosphere, 6 times higher than commercial jets fly, and spread out with a cap 55 miles across. For a brief moment, witnesses said it looked like a third sun had appeared over the Arctic. The destruction radius defies comprehension. Every building in Severny Village, 34 miles away, was completely destroyed. Windows shattered 560 miles away in Finland and Norway. The shockwave circled the Earth 3 times and registered as a magnitude 5 earthquake. One witness, 170 miles away, felt the heat as if from a hot oven, even through protective gear and dark goggles. The bomber crew that dropped it felt their plane get thrown upward and then plummet 3,000 feet from the shockwave despite being 30 miles away. They barely regained control and survived. But here's the truly insane part. The original 100 megaton design was never tested because Soviet scientists calculated it would deposit 25% of all global nuclear fallout to that date in a single explosion. They literally built a weapon too powerful to use. Tsar Bomba released the equivalent of 1% of the sun's energy output in a fraction of a second, focused on one spot on Earth. It was essentially a propaganda bomb, too large to be militarily practical, but perfect for demonstrating to the US that they should not mess with the Soviets. No one has built anything approaching this level since. Tsar Bomba stands alone as the absolute peak of destructive power. But we still got one more level to cover. Level 10, the theoretical limit of destruction, the antimatter bomb. This isn't science fiction anymore. It's theoretical physics that could render every nuclear weapon we've discussed completely obsolete. When antimatter meets matter, they don't just explode, they annihilate each other completely, converting 100% of their mass directly into energy. Einstein's energy equals mass times the speed of light squared taken to its absolute extreme. 1 gram of antimatter colliding with 1 gram of regular matter releases the equivalent of 21.5 kilotons. That's more than the bomb that destroyed Nagasaki, from an amount of material smaller than a paperclip. To put this in perspective, Tsar Bomba weighed 26 tons and delivered 50 megatons. An antimatter bomb with the same yield would need just 5 pounds of antimatter, about the weight of a big-ass gaming laptop. A device the size of a hand grenade could pack multi-megaton destructive power. The blast effects would be identical to nuclear weapons of equivalent yield, but with one terrifying difference: no radioactive fallout. Antimatter annihilation produces pure energy in the form of gamma rays, devastating prompt radiation, but but no lingering contamination. It's the ultimate clean bomb that kills everything in the blast zone but leaves the area habitable afterward. Imagine a suitcase-sized device that could vaporize Manhattan with no long-term environmental consequences. From a military perspective, it's both cleaner and more horrifying than anything we've built. Fortunately, this remains firmly in the realm of theory. Creating antimatter requires particle accelerators, and storing it safely is nearly impossible. It annihilates on contact with any normal matter. Current estimates suggest 1 gram would cost $62 trillion to produce. The entire global antimatter production to date amounts to nanograms. But the concept illustrates a chilling truth. Nuclear weapons only convert a tiny fraction of their mass into energy. Fusion bombs are less than 0.1% efficient. Antimatter would unleash it all. 100% mass-to-energy conversion. Level 10 represents the theoretical ceiling of human destructive capability. If we ever master antimatter weaponization, every previous level becomes obsolete overnight. Until then, it remains the ultimate thought experiment in annihilation.